We're now live.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Peter Kennan here from South Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership as Vice Chair of the TFN General Purposes Committee. I'm chairing the meeting, so welcome to members who are attending today. Welcome to the meeting. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Members are required to declare any personal, prejudicial or disclosable.
Oh, Peter, we've just lost Peter.
Sure, he'll be back shortly.
We lost you there briefly, Peter.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't know whether it was me or elsewhere. So I think I was just starting to cover item 2. Is that the situation? Okay. Declarations of interest. Members are required to declare any personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interest they may have relating to any items on the agenda and state the nature of such interest. Are there any such declarations? No? Okay, thank you. So we can carry on to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of February 2023. Are there any matters there, or are those minutes approved? Okay, they are approved therefore. Are there any matters on which we need to pause at this point, or is everything picked up on this agenda?
Chair, as far as I'm aware, there's no matters arising from the previous meeting that are otherwise that are not covered on the agenda for today.
Thank you. So we move on to item 4, which will be led by Julie Openshaw, about constitutional changes under delegated authority. Julie.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. I hope the report is self-explanatory and you've had the opportunity to read it. In essence, earlier this year, Board agreed to expand the delegated authority of the monitoring officer to make minor and consequential changes, including improving references to legislation and operational processes, provided that no financial thresholds are increased. And the appendix to this report is the result of that review, which has subsequently been undertaken with that in mind, and on which I've obviously consulted with Martin Tugwell as Chief Executive, as is required under the terms of the delegation. Strictly, there's no need for committee to actually approve the changes because they're to be made under officer delegation. But I did obviously indicate at an earlier meeting that this being the first time that this power has been exercised to any more major extent, I would make sure that committee was cited. And this is basically that citing to allow for any final comments that there might need to be before we republish the agenda. I would say that further work is going to be done to improve the layout of the agenda as well, which unfortunately we've not been able to complete yet, but that won't affect the content. I also just need to point out as well that WICA have made contact to point out a couple of other further minor but necessary amendments which do need to be picked up around the voting numbers and listings, and we will address that as well, and obviously we'll ensure that the new voting arrangements following the Cumbria split are comprehensively addressed. So if there are any errors or omissions in terms of that, we will address those as well. I think Rachel Jones, who was the officer that brought that to my attention, is on the call this afternoon. Other than that, and subject to any other comments you may have, can I invite you to note the proposed changes, please?
So are there any comments from any members? Can't see any hands. So we're simply asked to note this paper. So that is what we'll do, Julie.
Thank you, Mayor.
So we can move on to item 5, consideration of future constitution developments. Martin is going to lead us on this one.
Thank you, Chair. And it may seem strange that we're kind of talking about needing to have a further look at the Constitution, having just gone through that preceding paper. But as I hope is self-explanatory in the paper, there are a number of things that we need to look at. Some of them are associated or arising from changes in organisation. So there's in the second of the 5 issues about representation on TFM, there's a note that we need to look at what, if any, changes are required to the Constitution in light of the changes underway with the local enterprise partnerships. There are also a number of authorities, former Rail North authorities in the Midlands area, who are going forward with their own devolution deals, and that will have implications in terms of representation, which we need to just reflect upon. And there's also I would like us to explore as a committee whether or not the use of the matrix that we have about the sub-regional groupings when it comes to things like the Rail North Committee and by implication the general purposes, whether that remains fit for purpose or is the most appropriate way of doing it, or whether we should be looking at an alternative. So a number of things around representation which come as a consequence of change to elsewhere beyond TFN. The first of the areas that I had identified though in the paper was around implementation of the strategic transport plan. So we know as we're progressing with the transport plan, we're also needing to look at implementation, and that will be looked at as part of the work of the main board. But there may be issues that we need to look at in terms of our aspirations for improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of implementation, which may have implications for the Constitution. So as we're doing the review of the transport plan, the work on implementation, so it feels a timely and a moment to do some work in parallel to see whether there are any changes to the Constitution that we need to do or promote as a consequence of that. So things like the relationship with existing national processes, as an example. Colleagues of mine have been at a number of transport select committees of late. We made the point, for example, in regards to national highways, that we've been promoting the idea that there should be an amendment to their licence to actually require them to seek and respond to our formal advice as a statutory subnational transport body. Likewise, we've seen with some of our technical work the importance of the linkages with other sectors. So, for example, EV, the links with the energy systems is important. Some of the digital stuff requires good digital connectivity. These are all kind of relationships which we've kind of had a bit of a touch upon in the past when we were looking at the Northern Transport Charter. Again, with that combination of the transport plan and implementation, now is the right time to, in parallel, look at it in terms of the Constitution. The remaining areas, the next area is again one that's very live at the moment, around rail reform. We've talked about the importance of having a northern proposition that might have implications for the Constitution. So as we work as a technical team to think about what that might be for consideration by the main board, again, so it is appropriate to think about that through the General Purposes Committee. You'll see in the report, I've touched on one issue which I know has been raised at a number of previous board meetings, and that about when it comes to rail, we do a lot of work with Northern and TransPennine, but actually Cross Country, Avanti, LNER, these are other important rail operators for the North. And so again, it now feels like it's an appropriate time to just explore what, if anything, we might aspire to in terms of a relationship with those. The final two things are a little bit more straightforward. One is we have a relationship on highways set out as Highways North Board. That was, as it's currently written, it's very much written around the original road investment strategy process. Of course, we're now into the various cycles about that. So seems in a moment to update that, and mindful that we did change the constitution in the early days of the pandemic to allow for the ability to make decisions virtually. We've seen that legislation not carried through, so therefore it just feels useful just to check that we've got the right arrangements in the constitution for consultation calls. So those are the kind of areas that we think we should be looking at, as I said, in parallel with the work we're doing on the transport plan and implementation. The idea of bringing it to the committee today was just to seek that, give you a chance to say whether you agree with that, whether we've missed anything. If you have, then we can include it within the scope. The final bit of the paper really just sets out how we will take that forward. We'll work with you as a committee. We'll need to have some conversations clearly with the department and also national bodies like Network Rail, National Highways. And we also need to just remind and remember that we need to update the Memorandum of Understanding with the department, a bit of work which is underway at the moment. So what we would aim to do is undertake this work relatively quickly, do it over the next 6 months, so that when we get to December and we're presenting to the board the final version of the strategic transport plan and the proposals around implementation, there is a third package around proposals and for amendments to the constitution, so that all three of those pieces of work are lined up. Chair, I hope that gives you a sense of why we're doing it and the focus for it. And as I said, it's really just an opportunity to just seek members' views about that scope, whether we've got it right, and any other comments that they may have.
Thank you, Martin. That's very helpful. Does anyone have any comments on the main issues which Martin has put in the paper at item 3, the 5 items, or any more that we think should be added? Hands up if so. Okay. I don't see any hands, Martin. I just wanted to pick up... Oh, we have a hand. Susan Hinchcliffe, please. Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thanks, Peter. I think largely, I think the themes are right, aren't they? I think it's probably why there's silence in the room. But I just wonder, on, is it number 3 about NPR? I didn't quite understand all that, Martin. How does, obviously NPR is changing, obviously from a Bradford point of view, we've had a change to the IRP in the last week as well to include Bradford, which obviously isn't the same as NPR, but so just talk through how that works with the Constitution and NPR.
So, if I may, Chair, Councillor Hinchcliffe, that's reflecting the fact that as a main board, TfN has been discussing and agreeing the co-sponsorship arrangement, which talks about how we will work with the department in providing that oversight and that check and balance with the development of. So it's about a process, and in the same way that we have reference to the Rail North Partnership within the Constitution, we have this reference to the Northern Highways North Board. I think we should just test to see whether we need to be explicit in the Constitution about that relationship with the DFT in terms of the process associated with Northern Powerhouse Rail. Not to look at the detail, not to look at the particular schemes, but it's about cementing into the Constitution that is a relationship that we've got now, which we didn't have previously.
Sorry, Chair, can I just come back in? And what power do we have to approve the Constitution, or does it have to be approved by DFT if we change our Constitution?
So in terms of the work we're carrying forward, I would propose that we work with the department, because clearly it is, we need to make sure that they are aware of some of the changes. But ultimately, the Constitution is a matter for the TfN board, and therefore your considerations, we will bring forward to you and work with you on proposals, and then subject to your agreement, those will be presented to the TfN board for their final endorsement.
Is that okay, Councillor Hinchcliffe? Okay, thank you. Martin, I've just got one or two things. All things that have really arisen at board that fit into these categories. So not fundamental, but you remember that in dealing with roads, we had the session with National Highways at the last meeting, but there are some strategic roads that don't fit into the National Highways portfolio. So I think we needed a commitment to try and get the engagement with other areas, Wales, the Midlands, and perhaps Scotland as well as and even local authority roads that connect cities across the north that are considered really very important but don't fall within the trunk road or strategic road network. Is that something we should actually highlight?
So I think it's something that we can include within our considerations, Chair. You've made the point, sorry, not just you, but a number of members made the point at the TfN board, I think, about, for example, linkages across on the highway network from Sheffield across to Manchester actually go through Derbyshire. So we need to think about some of these relationships out with. The point about the relationship with the devolved administrations, I'm not necessarily sure it's something from the Constitution, but let's put it into that mixing pot and then have that discussion as part of what we do. It may highlight it's about the way we work with the devolved administrations more generally rather than the constitutional matter, but let's not miss that point at this stage, because it's exactly what we should be doing, throwing it into the pot.
I think Councillor Swinburne, you've put your hand up, so perhaps is it a point on that as well?
Yeah, thanks, Peter and Martin. I mean, maybe it's not the right platform today to be discussing that, but I'll just mention, because you did about the highway side of it and how disappointed I am with Highways England. Martin, you know very well, when I've attended all the board meetings, I've raised it each time about the state of the A180, about the resurfacing of that 60-year-old road that's not been dealt with, for the infrastructure needed for leading into North East Lincolnshire and the dock side of things. But I don't even get a response. I mean, we get a response at the board meeting saying, yeah, I'll look into it, from the CEO of Highways England, but I never get anything back again either, any time at all. Nobody's going back to me and saying, yeah, we're going to look at it. We're having a word with the Minister of State for highways and whatever like that. I don't get anything. So I'm disappointed that we don't get any feedback from the things that we bring up at the board meeting.
Chair, I will just take that one away, Councillor Swinburne, and make sure that I raise it personally with Nick Harris, the Chief Executive, and ask that they do come back on that.
Yeah, it's important to us all, for all our own areas, that we've got to fight for these sort of things. But as I say, a 60-year-old road that is now the main part of, the free ports and the infrastructure around the ports of Grimsby, Immingham and Goole and that sort of thing. It's just not good enough not to have some sort of a formal recognition of what we're talking about. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that, Peter, if it was the wrong platform for it.
It's a related point, so that's Martin, take that away and deal with it offline. That's great. So, Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, just GBR obviously is the new kid on the block, isn't it? I'm not sure what the timetable for its introduction is. It seems to be quite slow of late. However, is this constitution review in light of that then, Martin? Is that what you're thinking about, how the role of TfN changed GBR? Because if that is the case, then we do need to have a conversation, don't we, about how devolution works on railways, and that needs to be had with the constituent authorities. Because I'm personally a very strong believer in subsidiarity, that decisions are best taken closer to the people it affects. But obviously in transport terms, you can't manage transport in West Yorkshire without obviously connecting somewhere outside West Yorkshire. So whereas actually our Airedale line is very much, Bradford and Craven, and that's about it really. So that could be managed better. So I suppose we need early conversations, I suppose, is what I'm saying, about what our understanding is about devolution, how it affects TfN, before we start drafting constitutional changes. And a good opportunity, really, to compare opinions.
And if I may, Chair, respond to that, I think there's a couple of things in there, Councillor Hinchcliffe. First of all, we've already got the ability through the existing devolution effects for rail we've got under the Rail North Agreement to set up, we call them regional business units or business units, whereby there's an even stronger linkage between the local partners and what happens with the rail network at the moment. We've had historically a North East business unit, are now working with colleagues over in the west of the region to set up what is being called a Northwest Business Unit, which is more than just the Metropolitan Combined Authority areas. It involves Lancashire and some of the other adjoining authorities. So we have the ability already within the devolution that we have under the Rail North Agreement to have these more sort of focused business units, which allow the kind of local integration between local rail services and other forms of transport in and around cities and their conurbations. So I think that's something we can maybe already explore. I think in terms of GBR, Councillor Hinchcliffe, there's no definitive statement about whether or not we would see the proposed legislation to establish GBR in the King's Speech. That will be something that I think we'll have to wait until the final moment. I think the sort of I think it's fair to say that people are not necessarily are kind of saying we need to be ready in anticipation of that, and I think that's where we can build on what we've already got in terms of the Rail North Agreement, so that we don't lose that. We don't lose that. I think we must protect the devolution we already have, and you're absolutely right, Councillor Hinchcliffe. If part of the Northern proposition to GBR is, hey, let's work in this particular way because we will get better outcomes. Exactly. You're right. Now is the time to have a conversation with partners about how that might look.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of other quick ones, Martin. Just leading on from your comments about 3.9 and the importance of other rail operators. It's been a topic that's been raised numerous times. I think it's raised because if you're in the centre of a region, a lot more of your transport is around the region. If you're at the edge of a region, and again, this is for Councillor Swinburne that was on the call, it's the same as outlook as South Yorkshire. If you're at the edge of it, more of your transport is outside your region.
Yep.
And so this point about transport for the north and not transport in the north, it would be good if it was embedded as opposed to just looking at how cross-country serve northern cities and how LNER serve northern cities. I think it really needs to be wider. It needs to be economic geography of the north and key connections, because we know what happened when Avanti cropped up. It came straight to TfN, and that was to do with a London service. It was nothing to do with transport in the north.
Yeah.
So I do think it could be, perhaps the review could be focused on what we can do more effectively on all these operators as they affect us all economically.
Understood, Chair. I think it's a good point, and again, it's the right time to throw that into the kind of the melting pot now.
Yeah, while you're doing the review. And my final one was the need for urgency. This is not to do with what you should be doing on the review, but it's the urgency about TfN representation, given that the local enterprise partnership in South Yorkshire is likely to disappear by resolution of the MCA, probably by the end of September, if I was guessing, the next MCA meeting. And so the way the Constitution's written, we could end up with business representation starting to drop off under the existing governance. So I'm wondering if you could focus on a quick fix for that, which is possible under the existing Constitution, which talks about the mayoral combined authorities co-opting people. It doesn't talk about LEPs.
Yeah.
But then we seem to have overridden that elsewhere in the Constitution to talk about LEPs. So, a quick fix would be, just to allow transport authorities or MCAs to co-opt an appropriate business representative, just as a short-term fix.
Definitely, let's take that one away, and I get the urgency, Chair, of that particular one. I think in conversation with the Chair, it's been clear we must retain a strong business voice into the work of TfN. So by all means, I'm very, very comfortable to take that guidance on behalf of the committee, that we give particular priority to that relationship with the business community, given the changes in the LEPs. And you're right, there is that power to co-opt. So let's see how we can use that to best effect, whilst we just get ourselves into a position with the review to kind of look at the longer term. Very happy to take that one away and treat it with the urgency that you quite rightly flag up.
Okay. Now, that's very helpful, Martin. I know it's not strategy, it's implementation, but it's a key one.
Given the focus for TFN on unlocking the North's economic potential, then having a strong business voice as part of TFN's work is really fundamental too.
Thank you. I see no other hands, and so I think that concludes item 5.
Sorry, Chair, can I just chip in? Just on the conclusions, at 4.3, it talks about the department and other national bodies, but it doesn't refer to combined authorities and constituent authorities. I do think if we're thinking of changing the constitution, it needs to look to our constituent authorities. So if we could, any sort of preamble work you do, Martin, now, can you please have a workshop with all the relevant people from the authorities before we start changing things?
The point of the kind of the reference there, Councillor Hinchcliffe, is very much looking at beyond the constituent authorities. Maybe it's my mistake in terms of making this assumption that I was getting across. We're working with you as a committee. We will work with our partners to as part of this. It was really just flagging up. In addition to all of that, we need to be looking at the national bodies, both the department and Network Rail. But forgive me if it wasn't as explicit as you've just put across, but we will definitely make sure we do that in partnership with the constituent authorities.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry to butt in there.
No, that's fine. Thank you. So in that paper, Martin, are you satisfied that it is just a recommendation that we endorse, subject to the discussions we've had, the scope of the review? So I think the committee has endorsed it, subject to those observations. And I think that means we can now move on to the next item on the agenda. So at this point, item 6, we are to exclude the public. So if it's so resolved. So to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during considerations of items 7 and 8 on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as set out in paragraphs 1 and 2 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Could we please resolve that we exclude the public at this point?
Does that include you, Peter, because you're down on here as a guest?